So scoliosis affects many people. It's estimated that 10% of the American population has scoliosis. 20 million people worldwide are diagnosed with it. 3 million people in the United States alone are diagnosed each year. And that's a lot of people. And the traditional medical world calls most scoliosis idiopathic, which means we don't know what causes it and we don't know. Well, I seem to know. I mean, I don't know. I have been gifted by many important discoveries, and I can tell you I know a lot of where it comes from based on my experience I'll be sharing with you. So in my world, it's not idiopathic. There's some really good reasons why it happens. It's fairly common from mild cases to severe cases. In most instances, it's diagnosed between 10 years old and 18 years old, and up to 90 to 95% of the time it's in young females, girls. And it can happen in older adults, and there's a reason for that too. And we'll be exploring those topics along the way. I don't believe that scoliosis has anything to do with your genetics, your biology, your hereditary, your family history. To me, that's a scapegoat. I'm going to share with you some really wonderful ideas where it comes from and how to correct it. So this is a whole new model to follow. In the Western scientific model, scoliosis is considered a disease, a failure of the body, a genetic mistake. And I don't believe that at all. There's really good reasons why it happens. The way it's normally treated, either spinal surgery to fuse discs together, spinal surgery to insert rods along the spine which never come out, so you have a stiff back or neck, braces for forever that keep you stiff and frozen. In many cases, you're taught to strengthen your muscles around the spinal nerves, which I don't agree with at all. And I'll be talking about that too. So I don't agree with the traditional treatments, and I've had great success helping people heal with my approach I'm going to deliver today. So I completely disagree with the current medical model, and I'll share with you how I've helped people get well. It's not a disease. There's very simple things that can be done to correct it. So next, let's talk about what scoliosis actually is. In its classic definition, it's a curvature of the spine. Now that sounds simple, but it could be more complicated than that. It has to do with the bones, but it's not being caused by the bones. And here's where my ideas differ. Your bones are not causing scoliosis, they're the after effects of scoliosis. Something else is causing the bones to shift out of place, and we're talking a great deal about that. So scoliosis is a curvature of the spine, and it could be in the upper back, could be in the lower back, or you could have both. Now there's also some variations. Classic scoliosis is a curvature to the side. There's also two other categories. Kyphosis is a rounding of the upper back, and lordosis is a rounding of lower back. So in this video, we'll be including all of those in the same category as scoliosis. So once again, while your spinal vertebrae are involved and they're twisting either sideways or front to back, the bones are not causing that. So in order for the bones to fall into place, we have to work outside the bones. For instance, if I lay this bone down on the floor, it would stay there forever. Bones do not move out of place by themselves. And that's the craziness. People still blaming your bones for the problem. Bones are being pulled out of center by something else, and that's what we need to address, what's outside the bones. So if I looked at another model here, a skeleton of the body, the classic skeleton model is your bones are holding you up. Well, that's not true. Your bones don't hold you up. You are not a series of blocks or a series of cables and pulleys. So the current scoliosis model teaches us that the bones are holding us up. They're not holding us up. It's your other things, your muscles, your fascia, your soft tissue that's actually holding you upright. So the whole notion that your bones are holding you upright is incorrect. We need to work outside of the bones to get the bones to fall back into place. So just to reemphasize, your spine's very important. It's your central nervous system. It connects all the nerves out the arms and legs and all to your organs. But in scoliosis, the fact that your bones are being pulled out of place is not coming from the bones. So we have to address outside the bones. There's normally supposed to be a small indentation in the upper back and a small one in the lower back. So a straight spine is not actually good either. You want a little bit of a curvature, but you don't want too much. So ideally the spine has a tiny bit of curve to begin with. What happens in scoliosis is something else is pulling the bones out, and we have to address that something else, and that's what we'll talk about. And here's the three issues that we're trying to address. Scoliosis, which is classic scoliosis, is a twist off to the side. Kyphosis is a rounding of the upper back. And lordosis is a rounding of the lower back. Together, we'll all call them scoliosis just for the purpose of today's video. And here's a picture of the three issues. Scoliosis, off to the side, kyphosis, rounding of the upper back, and lordosis, which is rounding of the lower back, also called sway back sometimes. So here's something really important to consider. Not all scoliosis is the same. So not all treatment for scoliosis will be the same either. So when I work with a client or a yoga student who is diagnosed with scoliosis, I have to determine where it's coming from. Is it kyphosis, a rounding in the back? Is it lordosis in the lower back? Is it the S-curve from the upper back in scoliosis in the lower back? I have to look at the body individually. So it's not a take a magic pill and you're well symptom, because everybody's scoliosis might be coming from a different place, addressing the body differently. So each treatment is more individualized. Here's a picture of classic scoliosis, a twist to the side. It's important to treat scoliosis as early as possible because it leads to complications. Not just physical pain and discomfort, it could start affecting your spinal nerves and your breathing and other organs. So the sooner you can correct it, the better off you'll be. And here's the x-ray of scoliosis, showing you how your organs can be impacted, not just because your spine is shortened and crooked. It affects your heart and your lungs and all the internal organs and glands. So really important from the inside out. You could have some issues because your spine is curving. This is a picture of somebody with a rounded upper back called kyphosis. I can guarantee you this person's not happy in their body. They don't feel good. They're collapsing forward. They've got aches and pains on neck and shoulders, mid-back. This is not a good body to be living in. This is what happens when you neglect your body and don't take care of those issues in your spine. The previous picture demonstrates the kyphosis, which often happens in older people. And it doesn't have to happen. It leads to a dowager's hump in the back where you start getting a lot of fatty deposits, painful, irritating area. And a lot of older adults get that and they're classified as diseased or you're just old. That's not true at all. It's a pattern they've been in for many years and they've never reversed the pattern. And I'll talk about the initial causes in a minute, but it doesn't have to be older people either. Younger people can start the process too by what they're doing or what they're not doing. So I'll show you a picture of a younger person who's collapsing forward as well. This concept comes from anatomy teacher Thomas Myers, who wrote a book, Anatomy Trains. This is called the superficial front line of the body. And in the yoga world, we try to stretch it, elongate it, lengthen it. And when you do that, you stand upright the rest of your life. But what happens when you don't and you do the opposite? When you spend your life, especially early on, with poor posture, hunching over, You will have a rounded back when you get older. You might even have the dowager's hump. You collapse forward. Now that could be for lots of reasons. For just you collapse forward because you're not disciplined in your posture. You have emotional issues, what's called shame. You're trying to bury your chest and hide. You're doing excessive weight training where you're hardening the front of your body and rounding the back. There's several reasons this happens. But if this is the younger person and they don't correct the pattern, they will have a rounded upper back as they get older. So let's talk a little about the anatomy of scoliosis, kyphosis, lordosis. What is actually happening? So first we talked about bones do not move out of place by themselves. So if you've been diagnosed with any of those, scoliosis, lordosis, kyphosis, your bones are not causing the problem, they're the result of the problem. So what's causing the problem? That's what we'll address here. So here's my little model. Right here is your bone. And what it's doing, your bone is wrapped in fascia tissue. It's called the periosteum. The periosteum is a layer around the bone of connective tissue called fascia. And that fascia pulls from here. So muscles don't connect to bone. So if somebody tells you, I just tore my muscle off my bone, that's an incorrect statement because muscles do not attach to bone. Your fascia attaches to the bone. So that's what pulls on the bone, your fascia. And the fascia continues and it wraps through. So here's your tendon here. All these little fibers here are your tendon. And what the tendon is, it provides extra strength. There's a lot of collagen fibers in the tendon to provide extra strength so that this whole structure is stronger. So we have bone over here. We have periosteum, which is fascia around the bone. The same fascia continues and the tendon travels through the fascia. And then over here you have the muscle fibers called myofibrils. They're muscle fibers, and it's the ones who contract and relax. So if you want to lift your arm up, these muscle fibers are contracting and relaxing, contracting and relaxing. They're all enmeshed in this fascia network. It's one continuous network. So what happens is, if your bone is being pulled out of place, the fascia is pulling the bone out of place, traveling through the tendon, and the muscles are too active. So somehow you've got overactive muscles somewhere causing to pull the bones out. So this whole network is causing your spinal issues. So when I work with clients, I have to work backwards. I do fascia body work. I give them yoga poses to start lengthening the fascia and eventually patterns to repattern the muscle groups. What I don't agree with when people say, let's just strengthen your muscles to correct your spine. It's already too tight. It's already out of place. It's an incorrect model. So you have to work backwards. You have to soften and release the fascia tissue that's pulling on the bone, travel through the tendon, and travel through the muscle so this whole network stretches. And then the bones go back into place by themselves. So this is how I address the body. Bone over here is being pulled out of place by tight fascia traveling through tendon, and muscles that are overactive, we'll talk about why they're overactive later on. That's how scoliosis begins. And here's another spinal model to consider. Here's your spine. Here's the muscle fascia network on the side. It's the muscles and fascia that are anchored to the spine and the bones that are telling the bones what to do. So if your bones are shifting out of place, it's because your fascia is pulling them out of place and it's starting to twist the spine. It means your fascia and muscles are too tight. Your spine is not causing the problem. It's everything outside the spine is causing the problem. And so when I work with people, I try to lengthen the fascia, relax the muscles around the spine. The mistake most people make, they try to strengthen muscles around the spine. Well, your muscles are already too tight. Your fascia is already too tight. It makes no sense to me. So my approach is lengthen the fascia, lengthen the muscles around the spine, and your spine goes back into place. And that's how I've had great success along this journey. Here's another way to look at things. If this is your spine, and here's the fascia and muscles outside, it's the tension, we call it tensegrity, pulling on the bones that hold your spine upright. Your spine is not a column like a building. It's not a pillar. It stays upright because you have tension that the fascia is pulling on it. And sometimes one side is pulling too hard, and that's what causes your spine to twist. And that's what I do. I try to lengthen the fascia tissue that's pulling on the spine, and the spine goes back into place because your spine is not holding you up. The fascia tension is holding you up. When you lengthen the fascia, then your spine will fall back into place. Those who are unfamiliar to fascia, it's like the white stuff in an orange. It's the wrapping and membranes around everything. It encompasses everything in our body. It's like a 3D printed, everything goes through our body, and it holds us upright, it wraps us together. The problem is when it's hard and tight for a long time, it dries out, it becomes brittle. It's harder to change when that happens. It can change because there's some chemical process involved. So what happens is in a regular yoga practice, for example, you keep your fascia warm and liquid. It wants to be watery and liquid. You don't want to harden it. And so over time, though, most people harden their fascia and they dry out as if they're born as a grape and they die as a raisin because their fascia is dried out. Same thing happens with scoliosis. If you don't correct it early on, it gets dry and brittle, and it's harder to correct. It's still correctable, but it's harder because you have to basically reinvent the tissue. You have to bring in energy and life and water back to it because it's dried out and brittle. So it's important. In my work anyways, in order to heal the scoliosis issues along the bone, I have to bring life back to the fascia that surrounds the bone. So now let's talk about the actual causes of scoliosis, in my opinion. So I found 4 distinct causes of scoliosis. Number 1 is emotional. Number 2 is traumatic. Number 2 is structural. And number 3 is viral. And we'll talk about those different ways of addressing the body here. So here's the question. Number 1, emotional. What does that mean? Well, I'm a body-mind therapist. I see how the mind affects the body, and I can guarantee you, whatever you think about affects your physical body a lot. And most people don't give it that much credibility, but that's what happens. So I would always ask myself, how come it is that young teenage girls are the ones who are getting most scoliosis? 90 to 95% of the scoliosis happens in young teenage girls. And so the medical world says, oh, it's their hormones. So I would say hormones play a part, but they're not the cause. And I'll just talk about what that is. That's a scapegoat, and I don't believe that at all. So here's what's happening. In the natural world, here's your body. It's a spring. And nature's trying to elongate you when you go through puberty, make you longer, make you taller, make you more open. And what happens is, a lot of times we push back and don't let it happen, so the spine starts to curve. So nature's trying to pull us upright, and we have mind issues that try to push us back down, and your spine has to curve. That's what happens. So the reason I know this, because several of my female clients who were in their 30s and 40s told me this. So a young girl is going through puberty, and nature's trying to push her up and out. She's developing hips and breasts, and nature's trying to make her into a woman. Well, what happens if her mind isn't ready for that? She's not ready to be a woman. She tries to make herself smaller. So nature's trying to expand her, and she says, I don't want to be a woman, I want to stay small. So you have these two forces colliding. So the spine has to curve. I find that 90-95% of the time, that's where scoliosis comes from. Why is that? Because in most cultures, we don't support young girls in their maturity. We have ugly names for what they go through and their monthly period, and they're shamed into being a woman, or they're sexualized as being a woman, and they're not comfortable emotionally in a woman's body yet. So I'll give you 2 examples here. One of my clients, she told me, this is how she told me. She says, when I was 12 or 13, I was a very competitive gymnast. And she says I was probably going to go to the Olympics. And I started going through puberty. And I didn't want to grow into a woman because a woman's body isn't good for gymnastics because it throws off your center of gravity. That's why they try to keep gymnasts small and petite. So she says, I didn't want to be a woman, so I forced myself to stay small. With her mind, and her spine started to curve because her mind was telling her body not to grow, but nature was trying to tell her body to grow, so the spine had to go somewhere. It twisted. That was the forces, two forces at work, nature and the mind competing. Another instance, a woman in her 40s now, she was tall and had a large breast. And she told me she matured early. And she was tall. And all of a sudden, she's a 12-year-old girl in a woman's body. And all of a sudden, boys and men are staring at her. And her mind wasn't ready for that. So she's just tried to make herself small and unseen. And so that caused her back to round because her mind wasn't ready to grow into a woman's body yet. In my experience, most scoliosis, especially because it happens for young girls, not boys, it's emotional. We have two forces colliding and it causes the spine to curve because young girls aren't supported in being women yet, or they don't have the skill set to be in that body yet. Now it's different when young boys go through puberty. We have some facial hair and our voice gets deeper and whatnot, but our changes aren't that graphic. But for a woman, a girl goes to summer, she leaves 6th grade, goes home for summer and comes back into 7th grade as a woman. Overnight, she's a woman and all of a sudden her body makes drastic changes. Well, that's if you're not emotionally ready for that or you don't have the support around you, you might not be ready for that. So you try to make yourself smaller and you hide and try to want to go back to when all your friends are still girls and now you're a woman. You're trying to be like them, so you're trying to shrink yourself. So I find that in most cases, scoliosis is an emotional issue. And also what happens is this. There are cases with boys having scoliosis too from emotional issues, but and now it has changed, but in most cases during recess, boys are out kicking the ball and throwing around and messing around and moving their bodies crazily. And in most cases, girls are in the corner talking and sharing stories. Now it's changed. I know girls still go out and play soccer at recess and whatnot and volleyball. But for the most part, boys have more freedom to let the energy out. And they don't have so much shame about growing up into a man. So it's a way our bodies are taught in our culture. So I find that the emotional aspect is the most prominent part of the scoliosis issue. Now, most people in the medical world disagree with me. They say it's a disease. I don't agree. I have personal experience with clients who told me their exact experience, and I said, okay. So that's number one. Now, the last 7 or 8%, there's 3 issues for that. Trauma, structural, viral. Trauma is, you can have a surgery when you're younger. For example, I have no clients who had gallbladder surgery or pancreatic surgery when they were young kids, and it caused scar tissue. And the scar tissue had a lasting effect on their internal organs, perhaps even grabbing onto a nerve along the spine. So I've seen cases with early surgeries, for example, when you're still developing, causing scar tissue that affects nerves that affect the spine, and that prevents the spine from growing. So that's a traumatic issue. You can also have an injury. You could be in a car crash when you're younger, when you're still growing. You could be in a bicycle crash that affects your nerves. So traumatic issues can affect spinal nerves as well and muscles along the nerve. Structural issues. So let's talk about that. So what is a structural issue? Okay, give you an example. I had a young female client about 12, 13 years old who had an extra vertebrae in her neck when she was born. So some people would call it a birth defect. So she had 8 cervical vertebrae. The problem is they weren't lined up straight. So I had to go in with my hands and do fascia body work and straighten out her spinal vertebrae because the extra one was turned off to the side. So that's a structural issue where her structure was off from how she was born. Also, structurally, we talked a little bit about it before. If you do a lot of weight training, you're tightening up your shoulders, you're tightening up your arms and chest, and you're rounding forward. Now you're going to hunch in the back. That's a structural issue. So you're shortening the front of the body, and you're shortening the front of the chest, causing the back to round. So that's your structure being affected, causing roundness in the back. And the fourth way is a little bit more complex. It's not my specialty, but a lot of my colleagues help me inform me on this topic. It's called viral. There are times there might be a virus in the spinal nerves or in the brain causing muscles to be overactive. It could be also a toxin in the brain that causes the spinal nerves to be overactive, causing them to be in spasm. Once again, it's not my specialty, but I have found on several occasions there's people I couldn't help because there's something else going on that I didn't know about. So I didn't have the skill level or the information to treat those people because it's that little other factor, that little piece that I go, that's not my territory. So, but from my colleagues, they've expressed there are times when viruses get attached to nerves in the brain or the spinal cord that cause overactive muscles that pull the spine off. So I just want to throw that out. In small cases, that also can happen. So going back to treating scoliosis, often you can't just treat the spine or spinal area. You have to treat other areas, and that's why not all scoliosis is the same. Here's a picture of somebody with lordosis, which is a rounding of the lower back, often called sway back. Most often is coming from the legs. And this is a picture of the psoas muscle deep in the groin, pulling the hips off center, pulling the lower back. So when I work with lordosis, I have to look at the leg issues. And here's a picture of the psoas muscle. It's a very large muscle here that attaches to the inner groin, the adductors, way down inside the inner groin. It travels through the pelvis and anchors onto the lumbar vertebrae right here. So if your psoas muscle from your groin is tight and it shortens and it pulls on your back, you could have lordosis, a curvature of the lower back, because you have a leg issue and your groin issue, and that's causing your spinal curve in your lower back. So that's what I say is not all scoliosis is the same. So what are the solutions? So in my work, my solutions are this: fascia bodywork and sometimes massage therapy, expansive movement, process work, and essential oils. We'll talk about those in detail here. So the first step that I use is called bodywork, and that's fascia bodywork. So what I do is a special technique. It's not massage. People think I'll just massage your back. It's not that simple because the fascia is like the bark of a tree, and you have to remove that to get the muscles to soften. So the way I envision the body is layers and layers and layers, like tree rings. You have to peel away those layers using fascia bodywork. It's a sense of melting the tissue with your hands. So it's a special technique you have to learn. And what I do is I stretch the fascia, not just along the spine, but all kinds of different directions, because a lot of times it's intertwined and tangled up with all kinds of other tissues. And so you have to stretch the fascia, melt it, lengthen it, and that's the fascia that's attached to the bones. And so once we get the fascia released, we can start doing some more muscle work with our hands, more traditional massage work, to start to get the muscles to relax and lengthen. So that's the strategy I use, and I've had lots of success with that, and I'll show you pictures here in a minute of that. But the first step I use to people, use my hands to do fascia body work, stretch the fascia like taffy being stretched, and allows the bones to start going back into place where they're supposed to be. And that's the first step I belong. So can scoliosis be healed? Of course it can, but my first step, you've got to do the physical body work if you can. If you can find somebody who knows how to do it. If you can't, there's other things I'll suggest along the way too. So here's an actual person I work with doing fascia body work. This is just one session. You can see how on one side he's rounded and shortened. And on the other side, there's length and space and much longer. In fact, you grow taller when you do the fascia body work because it lengthens everything around the spine. So this is just using my hands in a specific technique called fascia body work to lengthen the spinal fascia. And there's lots of other things that could have been done, but this was just one session. And here's another person I've worked with. You can see the severe change in the shoulders here after 3 sessions here. So one shoulder is quite dropped and there's a whole twist in the upper back. And just using my hands and stretching the fascia, I was able to correct. The bones fell back into place, just like that. So stretching the fascia with my hands allowed the bones to fall back into place. So this goes back to our original concept of the forces involved here. Here's a tree growing along the windy coast, and it wants to climb towards the sun, but the wind is pushing in another direction. So there's 2 forces at work. Nature in one way is pushing it one way, and nature in another way is pushing another way. So it's trying to climb towards the sunlight, and the force of the wind coming off the ocean is pushing in another direction. That's much like how our spine works when we have emotions involved. Nature's trying to push us up and out, and our mind is trying to hold us back down. And people often ask me, do I know anybody? And so I say, okay, if you can't see me, where would I go to get fascia body work? Well, here's a couple of resources: rolf.org, hellerwork.com, myofasciarelease.com, upledger.com, barrelinstitute.com. All these offer a different version of working with connective tissue or fascia. So these are resources you might be able to find somebody to work with. So the next pillar I work with is called expansive movement. Unfortunately, most of the movement in our culture is called contractive movement. People seem to believe that if they have an issue, they need to tighten it and harden it. They need to build muscle around it. I don't agree with that. So expansive movement is a system where you're lengthening and you're opening and you're stretching things and re-educating things. So there's one of my favorite approaches is through yoga therapy. And if you can get a yoga therapist who understands the depth of anatomy and what your issue is to target certain poses. But any yoga class or system starts to warm your body. So you're warming the body in yoga, and you're stretching and lengthening the fascia, and you're opening up, and the fascia, remember, is attached to the bones. So yoga therapy is a great place to start. There's other movement systems I like too. One's called Feldenkrais, which more is of an education system. It's re-educating your muscles on how to be and where they're supposed to go. So what I don't agree with is the classic, once again, people do planks and they strengthen their core and they strengthen their back and they've got scoliosis. I find this foolhardy because you're already too tight. Why would you want to tighten yourself up even more? So what I try to do is the opposite. Lengthen, soften, and open through first body work and then through expansive movement. And one of my favorite approaches is through yoga. But it's not do yoga once. It's like do it a lot. You've got to keep going regularly to start making the changes you're looking for. It's like brushing your teeth. You don't just do it once. You maybe have to do it every day to get the changes you're looking for. So people, especially older people, say, well, I'm old, I can't fix it. Well, here's a picture showing you that somebody did fix it. Now, I was not involved with this. I do not know this person. I do not know what treatment she did. I do not know anything about it. I saw this on a television show called The Doctors in 2019, and this is what they talked about. All I heard was she did yoga therapy to make these changes. So especially if you're older, it can happen. So the third pillar I work with for those who come from the emotional background, especially younger people, when I find I work with a younger person with scoliosis, is get them to realize the emotional issues that might be causing their rounding and their humping and their twisting of their spine. Do they have a shame issue, which is I don't feel good about myself, I don't feel worthy? Do they feel embarrassed because they're a woman? Do they feel unsupported? What I do is I teach them to imagine there's a hook on their chest and they lift their chest up, and that automatically lifts their chest up, drops their shoulders back. But apply a gratitude to it, feeling good about something in your life. Don't feel bad, feel important, feel good about yourself. So process work is important because a lot of scoliosis is people are rounding forward because they don't feel good about themselves. They're hunching forward. That could not just be a younger person, that could be an older person as well. So what I try to teach people is lift your chest, stick out your chest, open your heart, and practice feeling good about yourself, and don't feel shame or otherwise, and that'll help your body fall back into place. So the fourth pillar I work with is essential oils. And there's an essential oil called Raindrop. It's from Young Living Oils, and it allows you to put a bunch of oils along the spine in the attempt to kill any viruses that might be there. So Raindrop therapy from Young Living Oils is, I've used it sometimes. Like I said, it's not my specialty. It's not a field I know that much about. There's a lot of people who know the chemistry behind oils and whatnot. If I'm stuck sometimes, I'll try the Raindrop therapy, see if we can release anything. In case there's a virus stuck either in the occiput or along the spine, we'll use essential oils to try to mitigate or eliminate that virus that's causing the muscles to go into spasm. So that's my 4 approaches here. We do the body work. We do the expansive movement. We do the process work. We do the essential oils, and I've had great success with that. So when somebody tells you, oh, scoliosis is a disease that can't be cured, you need rods in your spine or fusion, or you need to be in a brace forever, I say, look another way, because there are solutions. I've got lots of people I've helped, but I didn't get help for them from the traditional old-fashioned way of just cutting the body open. It's about exploring what's causing this and what are the solutions to heal it. So to recap things, there's hope out there. I believe that all scoliosis is curable if you do enough of the right things. Remember that every case of scoliosis comes from a different source. It's not all the same. And everybody needs a different treatment. So if you can identify what started it, you can start to unravel and let your body come back into homeostasis again. I don't believe in most of the traditional approaches being done in the medical world. And once again, I've had tremendous success with my clients and yoga students with this approach. So I've got lots of data collected showing me it works if you do enough of the right things. So I want to give you hope. There's hope. If you can find the right people, the right courses, classes to find. Unfortunately, this video is not a how-to. I'm not going to give you the certain yoga poses I do, because each person needs different poses. So find the resources you need. There is hope out there. You don't have to live with this, and it's not a disease. So going forward, know you are curable. Thank you for watching this short video called Scoliosis, Truths and Myths. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I love talking about it. If you'd like to know more about me, please visit my website at johnburris.com, and please subscribe to my newsletter for more cutting-edge videos here. Subscribe to my channel, and I'll be leading you along the way to all kinds of new and important information. Thank you.